Forensic Restitution is a fraud investigation company that specializes in fraud investigation, recovery, and prevention services. The speakers you're going to hear from today bring over 50 years of collective experience in fraud detection and prevention, data analysis and recovery, insurance claims, cybercrime, fidelity guarantee, and business interruption claims. So today's talk is focused on the fraud triangle, and in particular, how COVID has affected it. Little housekeeping. Before I introduce our speakers today, the session will be 30 minutes long, and it's the first of many topics we plan to present for discussion over the coming weeks and months. And it is intended to be an interactive session. We'll have time for questions following the short discussion, but I encourage you to post any comments or questions you have in the chat as we go, and I will be making sure that we're addressing those as we go. We will endeavor to answer all of them during the session and can contact you directly if you prefer a private conversation. Please note, we will be recording this session and it will be posted to our website for future reference. So without further delay, I would like to introduce you to the experts you will hear from today. So David Oswald, forensic accountant, Simon Paget, forensic accountant, Sachin Maharaj, forensic legal, and Tamara Kiddo, forensic analyst. Get started. So to start us off, Simon, can you explain the fraud triangle? What is it exactly, and how does COVID affect it?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Afternoon, rather. Sorry, I'm in Vancouver. So I realize you guys who are in the fraud world probably understand the fraud triangle, but for the benefit of those who maybe are not too sure, I'll just give a very brief overview. This was the brainchild of a criminologist called Donald Cressy. He wrote a book in the 1950s called Other People's Money. And this book focused on the psychological side of the fraudster and the violation of trust when a fraudster is in an employment position. So he's receiving a salary and he's entrusted to look after the assets. So he wrote a book about how this is violated and how employment fraud and theft occurs. And as a part of that book writing process, he developed what was the brainchild of the fraud triangle. So I think you can all see on the screen here, we have literally a triangle with three corners on it, and the fraud triangle is really saying that an individual in an employment position would have a type of pressure in one corner, pressure usually being the need or the want for money, but not always. Second corner at the bottom, the opportunity. Third corner, rationalization. So just a second on each of those. The pressure is the motive for the individual. What makes somebody want to or need to steal? Ordinarily, it is the money. Yes, they need money or they want money. But also, there's other parameters that creep into this. The KPIs is a good one. When we are all given key performance indicators, this is an incentive for individuals to commit fraud. A very basic example is if you are supposed to do 12 things in a year and you've only done 10, then you can sneak a couple of sales or reports in from January, February next year into this year and make your figures look good. You've reached your KPIs. Well, that is fraud. So that's how the KPIs. And as we're going to talk about today, COVID does also have an impact on the pressure. The opportunity corner is simply the gaps in the processes, the weaknesses in the systems. If there is an opportunity there, it's more likely a fraudster would steal. And the third corner of the fraud triangle is the rationalization. So this is the thought process of the fraudster, what's going through his mind, what makes him say this is okay to steal. So we're going to look a little bit more depth in these in a few minutes in respect of how COVID is affecting them. But that's basically the introduction to the fraud triangle. Thank you.
Terrific. So thank you for that. Any questions before we move on? Nope. If you do, just raise your hand or add a comment in the chat, and I will make sure I'm monitoring that on a regular basis. So let's dive a little deeper. Sachin, over to you. How does COVID affect rationalization?
Thank you. So, hi everyone. So, in its simplest terms, rationalization is simply how a person justifies his thoughts and actions. So, in his mind, how does he justify his actions knowing that it's actually wrong? So, if you look at what's happening currently with the COVID climate, we've seen economies coming to a standstill. We have seen millions of jobs being lost. Canada alone has shed in excess of 3 million jobs since the start of the pandemic. We are seeing companies who have closed those doors and probably would not open again. So in terms of rationalization, here is some of the thought process that could be going through the minds of individuals, and this is how they would justify them committing fraud. We have lots of staff who are in the front line, and many of them, because they are facing that risk up front, they might feel a sense of entitlement in that they are putting themselves out there despite them not getting additional benefits. For those employees who are in the process of losing their jobs or whose jobs are becoming redundant, they might see this as a means of building up their nest egg before the companies get liquidated. There are many employees who have brought in significant sales and are expecting bonuses, incentives, and rewards, and many of this has been withdrawn, leaving them with a sense of entitlement. For those employees who are lucky to still be employed, many of them have seen their salaries and wages being reduced, despite them having to put in their full hours. So all of this creates a situation where in their minds, they believe that there's a sense of entitlement, and this is how they actually justify or rationalize them committing the fraud. Beyond those four elements that I mentioned, other things to bear in mind, some employees feel as if there's just no other way to make an income and committing fraud is the only way out. Some individuals would believe that because this is happening at the top and being perpetuated by the managers, it's okay for them to do that. Others might think that the amount that I'm taking or wanting to take is actually so small that no one would actually take notice. So for me, these are some of the key factors that would rationalize an individual committing fraud. Thank you.
Excellent. Any questions for Sachin before we move forward? Terrific. So Simon, I'm going to move it over to you again, and I'm going to ask you to explain how COVID affects pressure.
Hi again. So the pressure or the motive corner of the pyramid is definitely affected by COVID-19. If we just look at any type of economic downturn, if you look at the report to the nations, which is the ACFE report to the nations 2020, this tells us that whenever a country is experiencing an economic downturn, generally speaking, all industries are more prone to fraud risk. So of course with COVID, we are experiencing economic downturn on a geographical worldwide scale. In my mind, what this does to the motive is it actually turns it from an actual need for money. So an individual has an actual need for money when he commits fraud. He needs to pay his school fees, he needs to pay his hospital bills, etc. But it turns it from that into a fear of need for money. So it's kind of an in advance thought process that the fraudster goes through. He doesn't actually need money today. Realistically, there are many of them that do, but he's worried about losing his job in the future. He's worried about how long COVID's going to last. He's worried about, it is a fear of the future, and he needs some insurance in his bank account. So he will steal because of this fear of the future. Of course, the main motivator for stealing is financial, and as Sachin has just explained in rationalization, the financial needs in COVID, we all know we're all struggling to some extent or another, and we all need money, particularly those of us that have lost our jobs in COVID. So the financial reasoning is again a motive, and again KPIs as well. But a lot of it falls upon the opportunity corner, which we're going to share with you in a moment. But the opportunities, in my mind, are absolutely hugely created by COVID, and when you have an opportunity there, that in itself is a motive. So yeah, let's look at the opportunities now. Thanks.
Perfect. So yes, to that point, I'm going to introduce Dave, and you're going to walk us through opportunities.
Just continuing a little bit first on the pressure, there are a lot of people where there's two people working within a household, and one of those has lost their jobs. Maybe they've gone down from a fairly senior job to only being able to get the government subsidy. And that will be creating a lot of pressure on people at the moment, and how are they managing to pay their bills. So that really does ramp up the pressure. On the opportunity side, we really have got a tremendous change in the way that we do business. We've gone from working in offices to working at home, and all of a sudden there's a whole lot of things that we can do differently. So if we want to run a separate company from home while we're still claiming time from our workplace, who's going to know? We're at home, we can leave our computer logged on, we can go onto a second computer, and we can run a separate company. We can go along, and a lot of the normal checks and balances that exist within an organization have now disappeared completely. And therefore, we can exploit that and be able to push through expenses that may not otherwise we would not otherwise be able to push through. By doing that, we've created this perfect environment perfect storm for fraud, and that there are so many new opportunities for people to actually play with the system. I was talking to one of the large banks a couple of days ago, and they were shocked at how many of their staff members were involved in claiming both the government subsidy and claiming their salary. So although their salary hadn't gone down, or they were earning a lot more than what the amount was that you're allowed to claim from, they were still claiming. So it's really, really important that people look at the opportunities and how to address those opportunities that have now suddenly been created in this rather strange world that we're now living in.
Perfect. So any questions on the fraud triangle before we move on?
Louise,
Sorry?
If I could just add to what Dave said in terms of opportunity. In times like these, where there is an economic downturn, companies are obviously struggling to survive, and the focus is generally on those departments that are revenue generating. So unfortunately, those departments that are not seen as revenue generating, such as audit, risk, and compliance, they are normally the ones to first get the chop in terms of budget. And there goes your funds in terms of rolling out anti-fraud programs and so forth. And to further add to what Dave said in terms of opportunity, many individuals are working from home. They're using their own devices. They have access to company IP, and that in itself opens up the opportunity in terms of online fraud, cyber crimes, and so forth. And these are things that's beyond the control of the organization, simply because individuals are working from home. So it just adds to that opportunity, unfortunately. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you.
Hey, Louise, I had a question.
Sure.
So again, as we talk about, I like the part about, introducing about KPIs and the pressure and things like that. In my past career, working with a lot of sales team, unfortunately, I had people, because of KPIs, would lie about their KPIs and things like that. So for somebody to be pressured to do the fraud, is there some type of a behavioral thing that they just inherently have, or could this just happen to anybody because of the amount of pressure? So I guess my question is somebody kind of predetermined to do this, or how does somebody do this that's never done fraud before?
Great question.
Thanks for that question, Kevin. Really good one. People fall into three basic categories, and it goes across a whole host of things, but they'll 10% will be inherently honest. So 10% of the community will never steal, regardless of what the circumstances are. They could be on death's door, but they would not steal a loaf of bread if they were starving. It just goes against everything that they think of. On the other side of the spectrum, there's 10% that would steal regardless of anything that happens. So they just have that innate love of the game, and they would steal whether there were controls in place, whether they were wealthy. It doesn't really matter. And I mean, if you have a look at somebody like Bernie Madoff or somebody like that, that falls really into that sort of category. And then you've got the 80% in the middle. Now, those are your swing votes, so to speak, and those are the people who will steal depending on what the circumstances are. It doesn't mean that the person at the 11th percentile, away from those who do not steal at all, will suddenly start stealing for no reason whatsoever. He'll really have to be pushed in order to start stealing. Whereas the 11th percentile on the other side, closer to the side that steals all the time, might just need that little nudge over the top. And in our careers, what we find is a lot of the times, a lot of frauds start off by being accidental. A person submitting an expense claim twice. So putting in the expense claim of, let's say, a chit from a restaurant, and then a month later, going through his wallet and seeing the credit card slip there and saying, oh, I must have forgotten to put this in, putting it in, and then realizing that he's been paid for both, and then realizing that the company systems aren't good enough to pick it up, and then it becomes habit, them doing it. So it normally starts off with some sort of small error and then grows from there. On the other hand, people who do want to steal will test the system the whole time, so they'll have a look for ways that they can break through the internal controls.
Thank you.
Louise,
Yeah.
can I just quickly make a side comment there?
I have a question.
Who has a question?
At the moment.
Who's that? Louise, can I quickly ask the question?
Yes, Nick.
Okay, cool. Actually, more observation. I think with COVID-19 and the electronic, of the economic downturn, you're going to find more people committing small frauds. Those not testing the system type of frauds, but trying to survive type of frauds. Those recurring ones, because I think everybody would have some sort of the eyes on the big money in terms of prevention and detection, because everybody wants to safeguard what they have in their bank accounts from a company point of view. So the people are going to try and, in my view, really focus on the smaller type of frauds, the ones that is less likely to be detected over a short term. Because everybody's eyes is now, okay, well, we have to safeguard our money, and we need to make sure that you know, it's sustainable for us to use it in the next few months, or maybe the next 12 months, maybe. So that's maybe just the side comment that I wanted to make in terms of in these times. I think it's going to be easier to pick up your big frauds. Like in South Africa, I mean, there's one person that defrauded the government with I think 5.7 million rands, which is not a lot of dollars, but it's still a few a large amount here in UIF, workmen's compensation monies that was supposed to go to staff members, and the authorities were able to pick it up and arrest and freeze the accounts within a week. And that's unprecedented in South Africa. So that means that everybody's focus is looking for those big ones to make sure that the money that is a scarce resource is not just taken and wasted. Thanks.
Thank you. Somebody else had a question, I think, before we move on.
I'm just wondering, Nick, can I answer Nick, basically? Very good comment, Nick. I think you're quite right. As we all get back to work and start reconciling things and finding these frauds, we're going to find a lot of smaller stuff. And these are, like you say, I think these are people who are at home, they do need a bit of money, and they're actually testing the system, and they think they've got a built-in excuse that, oh, it's because I was working remote. I didn't understand that I needed authorization, or, you know, COVID-19, the connections weren't quite right, or some the connectivity. So I think we are going to see a rise in these small frauds of new fraudsters who are testing the system while at home and not being monitored. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. I have a question from Manny. With employees working from home and having access to company IPs, are there any system security measures which you can recommend? Anybody want to take that?
So it's a huge problem, IP at home. We're entering into very much uncharted territory at the moment. A lot of companies are using software in order to prevent people, and using dedicated laptops in order for people not to be able to put any external hard drives. But unfortunately, we live in a digital world where there are so many ways that you can transfer information into the cloud and then back down to the cloud, that really isn't that effective as a way of preventing the movement of data. The biggest things that I've seen is people monitoring very carefully what's happening in the competitive market and having a look for people who are competing with them in a way that could only have resulted from somebody leaving and going to the other firm. So, for instance, where we've been called in to do an anti-pillar type order and examine people's computers to see how they've taken customer lists and things like that and used them in other companies. But no, I haven't seen any specific system security measures out there at the moment that are addressing the sudden work from home attitude. But I will look and come back to everyone on that.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so let's move along. I want to get to some of the other questions that we thought we would want to cover off. Simon, can you talk a little bit about how you believe, or do you believe, that COVID has affected the capabilities of people to commit fraud? And we may have covered a little bit, but there may be some other tidbits that you can add to that.
Yeah, so very briefly, because I think we've only got a minute or two left for me to discuss this, but the fraud triangle has been extended into what's called the fraud diamond. If you look on the screen, pressure, opportunity, rationalization, there is now a fourth corner called capability. Now, traditionally before COVID, this related totally to the possibility of somebody being able to commit fraud. So the analogy I give is the guy that makes the tea in the morning for everybody, he can only steal tea bags. He doesn't have access to the funds. He doesn't have access to the finance department, to the millions of dollars. Fraudsters have capabilities by having large egos. There are cultural sensitivities here, which we don't really want to go into. Some fraudsters are effective liars. Some individuals are, some aren't, and they can't steal. Immunity to stress is a good one. Some people are immune to stress. A fraudster has a very stressful life. He can be woken up at any time of the night by the police knocking on his door and go to jail. He needs to be relaxed. Fraudsters are stressful. So fraudsters have capabilities. Now in COVID-19, the opportunities that we've just heard about create even more capabilities for fraudsters. So the lack of IT at home, extending the IT controls to home, the home environment, brings more people into this capability bracket. The lack of authorization, not everybody's working from home. Some people are still in their office environments, but they can't get approval to approve and authorize that big invoice. So they bypass the system or wait until later, and if it doesn't need approving, they can defraud the money. So that creates more capabilities for people. The physical distance is always an issue. When you are physically distanced from your central point of control, whether it be working from home or working from your holiday caravan or whatever people have been doing, physical distance always results in an increase in fraud risk, and that will increase the capabilities of many people. So summary is what you would expect. COVID-19 has brought many more people into the capable of stealing category. Thanks.
Okay, so we're running up to, we've got a couple minutes left. And I wanted, Dave, if you can kind of do a bit of a wrap up and talk a little bit about the COVID and companies' COVID and their response to fraud in this pandemic, and maybe if there's a few tips that you guys as a group can help everybody else understand what people can do to uncover that fraud.
Thanks, Louise. So basically, I think we've shown that the amount of fraud that we were likely to see coming up is going to be fairly large. I think Nick was quite correct in his statement that we're going to see a change in a lot of the fraud dynamic from people stealing for the fun of stealing to stealing out of necessity. And therefore, we're likely to see a lot of small frauds starting up. Unfortunately, though, small frauds do normally grow into large frauds when people realize that they can get away with it. If the ways that companies can go about looking at fraud and is having a look at what people are doing, keeping a check on lifestyle, having a look to see where people are accessing on their servers, making sure that people aren't taking IP that they shouldn't be taking, making sure that there's supplementary controls in place for any large spends of money, for changing clients to, or changing suppliers from one supplier to another. Because there's a large percentage chance that somebody will work out that, oh, we're buying from ABC. If I buy from ABC and sell it on to my company at ABC plus 10%, I can make that 10%. And it's that type of fraud that we're going to see a lot of. So changes in bank account details, changes in suppliers' names are all going to become crucial as we go through. And remember, the easiest fraud to create is just to open up a separate company in the same name as one of your genuine suppliers, have the genuine supplier send his invoice to you, and then forward on that invoice plus a percentage for handling to the company. And it's a perfect, easy fraud to commit. So you've always got to watch what's happening with bank accounts, what's happening with everything else. Simon, over to you.
As we all get back to our work environments and we start doing those monthly controls and year end comes around and the auditors start coming in, we're going to find a lot of this stuff going on. I think it's a perfect time for fraud risk assessment. We should be thinking about this. A lot of organisations haven't really done this. If we can now perform fraud risk assessments and determine where the risks were during the last 6 to 12 months, including COVID time, then if this points towards the lack of approval process being readily available for people while they were distanced, then this could be a pointer for us. But certainly all those reconciliations need a proper forensic review, because you're going to find lots of stuff in there where people will say, well, I had nobody there to approve it, or I wasn't understanding the process. I didn't have the correct document, so I just made my own document. It accidentally had my bank account number on the bottom. So perfect time for review and reflection at the moment as we all get back to work.
Louise, we've hit our time limit, so can you just wrap it up for us, please?
I've hit our time limit. So before I wrap up, if there are any questions that we were not able to answer, please put them in the chat. And if you found this helpful, please come back. We plan on having these sessions on a weekly basis. So we would love to have you come back and join us again. We plan to have these informative sessions. And if there's any topics in particular that you want to cover, please put them in the chat and we'll make sure that we address them on a go-forward basis and make sure that we add them into our roster. Information for Dave, Simon, and Sachin, as well as our upcoming topics over the next couple weeks. So please feel free to go onto the website and register in advance, or look for the email to come into you to register. Let me just see, there's a couple of chats here. So thank you. So I appreciate everybody jumping in and participating. From Nick, I think ethics are going to be put to the test. Kim, thank you for saying it's a great first session. And Ted as well, thank you very much for your feedback. Greatly appreciated. Hope you'll come and join us again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Keep well.